I've been standing at my sister Elena's living room window for 10 minutes now, watching the garden through lace curtains that smell faintly of lavender and old memories. The birthday party is in full swing behind me, voices mixing with soft jazz, the clink of wine glasses, laughter that feels distant, even though it's happening in the same room. But my attention is fixed on what I see outside, and my heart is breaking in a way I didn't know was still possible at 63. My son David is kissing someone in the garden. Not just any kiss, the kind that speaks of familiarity, of something that's been building for weeks or months. The woman in his arms is Carmen, my nurse, the same Carmen who helped me through my recovery after the stroke last year, who sat beside my bed reading to me when the words on pages looked like meaningless symbols, who held my hand when I cried from frustration at my own weakness. I should look away. I should give them privacy, pretend I haven't seen this intimate moment between two adults who have every right to find comfort in each other. But I can't move. My feet seem rooted to Elena's hardwood floor, and my chest feels tight with something I can't quite name yet. It's not just shock. It's not even betrayal, exactly. It's something deeper, more complicated. The garden looks beautiful tonight. Elena always had better taste than me when it came to flowers and outdoor spaces. Her roses are blooming despite the late season, and the string lights she hung between the oak trees cast everything in a golden glow that makes even this painful moment look like something from a romantic movie. Carmen's dark hair catches the light as David runs his fingers through it, and I find myself thinking, almost against my will, that they look right together, natural, like two people who've found something real in an unexpected place. But watching them hurts in ways I'm still trying to understand. "You look like you've seen a ghost, Maria." Elena's voice comes from behind me, soft with the concern that only sisters can perfect after 6 decades of practice. She moves to stand beside me at the window, following my gaze to the garden where my 50-year-old son is kissing my 38-year-old former nurse, with the tenderness of someone who's discovered something precious. I want to explain what I'm feeling, but the words seem stuck somewhere between my chest and my throat. How do you tell your sister that you're watching your son find happiness and somehow feeling like you're losing something you didn't know you still had? How do you explain that seeing Carmen, sweet, patient Carmen who never once made me feel like a burden, in his arms makes you question everything you thought you knew about the months you spent recovering? I should have known, I whisper, more to myself than to Elena. The signs were all there, weren't they? The way David started visiting more often during my recovery. How he'd linger in the kitchen talking to Carmen after she finished helping me with my exercises. The way she'd smile differently when he was around. Softer somehow, like she was sharing a secret with the room itself. Elena reaches for my hand, her fingers warm and familiar. We've held hands through every major crisis of our lives. When our mother died, when my husband passed, when Elena's marriage fell apart 3 years ago. Her touch is supposed to be comforting. But tonight, it just reminds me how alone I feel in this moment of discovery. Maybe it's a good thing, Elena says carefully, testing the words like someone walking on ice that might not hold their weight. David's been alone since the divorce, and Carmen is a lovely woman. You said yourself how wonderful she was during your recovery. She's right, of course. Carmen was wonderful, professional but warm, skilled but never clinical. She had a way of making the hardest days feel manageable, of finding small moments of laughter even when my speech was still slurred, and my right hand wouldn't cooperate with simple tasks like holding a coffee cup. She celebrated every tiny victory. The first day I could button my own shirt, the morning I walked to the mailbox without getting dizzy, the afternoon I read an entire page without the letters swimming around on the paper. But knowing she's right doesn't make this any easier to watch. Through the window, I see David pull back from the kiss, his hands still resting on Carmen's shoulders as he says something that makes her laugh. It's a private laugh, intimate in the way that suggests they've shared many conversations I was never part of. The realization hits me like a small, cold wave. They've been building something together while I was focused on rebuilding myself. While I was learning to walk steadily again and retraining my brain to find words that had temporarily gone missing, they were discovering each other. The party continues around us, but I feel separate from it now. Like I'm watching everything through glass. Elena's guests are people I've known for years. Neighbors, family friends, women from her book club who always ask about my health with genuine concern. Under normal circumstances, I'd be moving among them, catching up on whose grandchildren started college and whose husbands needed knee surgery. Instead, I'm standing at this window, trying to process a development that changes nothing and everything at the same time. If you like emotional stories like this one, please subscribe. We're trying to reach 1,000 friends here who understand that life's most important moments often happen in the quiet spaces between what we expect and what actually unfolds. And tell me, from which city are you watching? I'd love to know where this story finds you tonight. David looks up suddenly, as if sensing he's being observed, and his eyes meet mine through the window. For a moment, neither of us moves. The distance between us feels much greater than the few yards of garden and glass that actually separate us. His expression shifts from surprise to something more complex, guilt mixed with defiance, love tangled with resentment. It's a look I've never seen on his face before, and it frightens me in ways I can't yet articulate. Then he's walking toward the house, Carmen beside him, their fingers intertwined in a way that tells me this isn't new, this isn't sudden. This is something that's been growing in the shadows of my recovery, and I'm only now stepping into the light where I can see its full shape. I have maybe 30 seconds before they reach the back door, before this private moment of discovery becomes a conversation I'm not prepared to have. Elena squeezes my hand once more, a gesture that says she'll stand beside me no matter what comes next. But even her presence can't fill the strange emptiness opening up inside me, as I realize that while I was fighting to get my old life back, everyone around me was quietly building new ones. The back door opens with the familiar creak that Elena keeps saying she'll fix but never does. David steps inside first, still holding Carmen's hand, and the warmth from the garden seems to follow them into the house. They both pause when they see me standing by the window, and I watch Carmen's professional composure slip for just a moment before she recovers, offering me the same gentle smile she used to give me during our morning therapy sessions. "Mrs. Santos," she says, her voice carrying that careful tone healthcare workers perfect for navigating awkward situations. "It's so nice to see you looking well. You seem to be moving much better since you stopped coming to the house," I finish for her, and immediately regret the sharpness in my voice. This isn't Carmen's fault. She was hired to help me recover from my stroke, not to manage the emotional complications that apparently grew between her and my son while she was measuring my blood pressure and helping me relearn how to write my own name. David's jaw tightens in that way it's done since he was 12 years old and felt caught between competing loyalties. He inherited that expression from his father, the same stubborn set of the mouth, the same way of holding his shoulders like he's preparing for a fight he doesn't want to have but won't back down from. "Mom," he says, and there's something in his tone I can't quite identify yet. Not guilt, exactly. Something more complex. "We were going to tell you." "When?" The question comes out before I can stop it, and I hear Elena shift uncomfortably behind me. "After the wedding? After you moved in together? Or were you planning to wait until I had another stroke and needed Carmen's services again?" Carmen's face flushes and she takes a small step back, though David doesn't release her hand. I can see her calculating how to gracefully exit this conversation, but David seems determined to plant his feet and have whatever discussion has been building between us without my knowledge. "We didn't plan this," Carmen says quietly, looking directly at me with the same steady gaze she used when explaining my medication schedule or demonstrating proper use of my walking aids. "It just happened. During the months I was helping with your care, David and I found we had a lot in common. We started talking and then you started kissing in gardens while I was inside recovering from a brain injury," I say, and again the words come out harder than I intend. There's something brewing in me that feels dangerous, like a pot that's been simmering too long and is starting to boil over. Elena moves closer, her presence a gentle warning to be careful with my words. But I'm tired of being careful. I've been careful for months. Careful with my speech, careful with my movements, careful not to push myself too hard or expect too much too soon, careful to be grateful for every small improvement, every returned function, every day that I woke up still myself instead of the confused, frightened woman I was in those first weeks after the stroke. "That's not fair, Mom," David says, and now I can hear the frustration he's been holding back. "You were getting better. You had your exercises, your appointments, your routine. Carmen was doing her job and doing it well. But we're both adults, and what developed between us happened naturally. We weren't sneaking around or being dishonest. Weren't you?" I ask, surprised by my own boldness. "How long has this been going on? How many conversations did you have while I was napping or doing my puzzles? How many times did you walk her to her car and kiss her goodbye while I was inside, thinking she was just being professional when she lingered after her shift? David's hand tightens around Carmen's, and I see something flash across his face that looks almost like anger. It's an expression I recognize but rarely see directed at me. Usually he saves it for traffic jams or difficult clients at his law firm or the ex-wife who makes his life complicated with custody schedules and unexpected demands. "You want to know how long?" he asks, his voice getting quieter in the way it does when he's really upset. "About 6 weeks after Carmen started coming to the house. You want to know why? Because watching you recover was exhausting for all of us, Mom. Not just physically exhausting, emotionally exhausting. And Carmen was the only person who understood what that felt like, because she was living it too." The words hit me like a slap, and I feel Elena's sharp intake of breath beside me. The party continues in the other room, but our little corner of the kitchen has become its own isolated world where truths are being spoken that can't be taken back. "David," Carmen says softly, warning him to be gentle, but he's not listening to her anymore. He's looking at me with years of something I never noticed building up behind his eyes. "Do you know what it was like?" he continues. "Watching you struggle to remember words we'd shared our whole lives? Seeing you get frustrated because you couldn't write your own name? Having you look at me sometimes like you weren't entirely sure who I was?" Each question feels like a small wound, and I realize I never asked David how my stroke affected him. I was so focused on my own recovery, my own fear, my own slow journey back to feeling like myself, that I never considered what it meant for him to watch his mother become temporarily fragile and confused. "I never knew you felt that way," I whisper, and my voice sounds smaller than I intended. "Because you never asked," he says, not unkindly, but with the weariness of someone who's been carrying a weight alone for too long. "You were so busy being brave and working hard and getting better that you never noticed the rest of us were struggling too. Dad used to tell me how you did the same thing when he was sick, so focused on being strong that you forgot other people might need to be weak sometimes." The mention of his father stops my breath for a moment. Roberto has been gone for 3 years now, but David still talks about him in present tense sometimes, as if death were just a temporary absence that might be corrected with enough time and patience. The habit used to comfort me, but tonight it feels like another reminder of how much I don't understand about my own son's inner life. "Your father never told me he felt that way," I say, but even as the words leave my mouth, I'm remembering things differently. Roberto's silences during his final year, the way he'd watch me bustling around his sick room, organizing his medications and adjusting his pillows, with an expression I interpreted as gratitude, but might have been something else entirely. "Dad didn't tell you a lot of things," David says, and there's something in his voice that makes my chest tighten with dread. "Just like you don't tell me a lot of things. Just like we're all walking around pretending we're fine when we're not fine, and pretending we don't need each other when we do." Carmen squeezes his hand, and I can see her silently urging him to be gentler, to remember that I'm still recovering, still vulnerable in ways that aren't immediately visible. But there's something in David's face that tells me he's past the point of protecting me from difficult truths. The kitchen feels too small suddenly, filled with the weight of things that have been unspoken for too long. Through the doorway, I can hear Elena's guests laughing at someone's story, probably about grandchildren or vacation plans, or some other normal problem that normal families navigate without all this heavy emotional archaeology. "I think," Carmen says carefully, "maybe this conversation should happen when we've all had time to process things. This is Elena's party, and—" "No," David interrupts, but his voice is gentle when he looks at her. "I'm tired of waiting for the right time to say things that need to be said. I'm tired of protecting everyone's feelings except my own." He turns back to me, and I see my little boy in his face for just a moment, the child who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, who cried when I left him at kindergarten, who brought me dandelions and called them flowers because he didn't know the difference between weeds and something beautiful. "I love you, Mom," he says, and the words should be comforting, but somehow make everything hurt more. "But I'm not going to keep pretending that loving you means I can't also love someone else. And I'm not going to apologize for finding something good during a time when everything felt impossible." The room goes quiet, except for the distant sounds of the party and the hum of Elena's refrigerator. Carmen is looking at the floor, clearly wishing she were anywhere else. Elena is standing behind me like a silent guardian, ready to catch me if I fall. And David is waiting for me to say something that will either bridge this gap between us or make it wider. But I don't know what that something is yet. I only know that the son I thought I understood has just shown me a side of himself I never knew existed. And the woman I trusted with my recovery has become someone I'm not sure how to think about anymore. Everything feels shifted, like a picture frame that's been knocked slightly askew, and now nothing looks quite right. The drive home from Elena's party passes in silence that feels thick enough to cut. David insisted on following me in his car, claiming he wanted to make sure I got home safely. But I suspect he's really hoping for another chance to finish whatever conversation we started in Elena's kitchen. Carmen didn't come with him. She said her goodbyes politely, professionally, like we were still just patient and healthcare provider instead of whatever complicated thing we've become now. I pull into my driveway and sit for a moment, watching David park behind me in the street. The porch light I left on casts long shadows across the front yard, and everything looks exactly the same as when I left 3 hours ago. But something fundamental has shifted, and I'm not sure I know how to exist in this new version of my life where my son keeps secrets, and the woman who helped me recover apparently fell in love while teaching me how to button my shirts again. David approaches my car as I'm gathering my purse and the leftover birthday cake Elena insisted I take home. His face looks tired in the yellow porch light, older than his 50 years, and I realize with a small shock that I don't know when he started looking so worn down. When did the lines around his eyes deepen? When did his shoulders start carrying that particular weight that comes from trying to hold too many things together at once? "Mom," he says as I unlock my front door, "we need to talk." "I think we've talked enough for one night," I reply, but I don't close the door behind me. Despite everything, he's still my son, and some habits run too deep to break even when everything else feels uncertain. He follows me into the kitchen, where the remnants of my solitary dinner still sit on the counter. A half-finished bowl of soup, a piece of toast with one bite taken out of it. The sight embarrasses me somehow, evidence of the small, careful life I've been living since the stroke. Everything measured, everything planned, everything designed to avoid stress or surprise or any of the complications that might trigger another medical crisis. "You barely ate," David observes. And there's something in his voice that reminds me of how he used to worry about my eating habits when Roberto was sick, and I forgot to take care of myself. "I wasn't very hungry," I say, moving the dishes to the sink with movements that are still slightly more deliberate than they used to be. My right hand doesn't quite trust itself with breakable things yet, even after all these months of recovery. David leans against the kitchen counter, the same spot where Carmen used to sit while timing my medication doses and asking about my daily exercises. The association feels uncomfortable now, like a piece of furniture that's been moved to the wrong room and doesn't quite fit its new space. "I know tonight was hard," he begins, but I cut him off. "Do you?" I ask, turning to face him. "Do you really know what tonight was like for me? Because I'm starting to think there's a lot about my feelings that you haven't noticed lately." His jaw tightens again. That familiar defensive gesture, but this time I press forward instead of backing down. "You want to know what was hard about tonight? It wasn't seeing you with Carmen exactly. She's a lovely woman, and you're both adults. And I suppose there's nothing particularly shocking about two people finding each other during a difficult time." I pause, trying to find words for something I'm still figuring out myself. What was hard was realizing that while I was working so desperately to get back to being the person I was before the stroke, you were already moving on from that person. You were building a relationship with someone else, someone who saw me at my weakest and most confused, and somehow that became the foundation for your new happiness. David opens his mouth to argue, but I'm not finished yet. "And what was really hard was hearing you talk about your father like he confided things in you that he never shared with me. Like there was some whole conversation happening between you two about my failures as a wife, as a caretaker, as a person who supposedly cared more about being strong than about understanding what other people needed." "That's not what I said," David protests, but his voice lacks conviction. "Isn't it?" I ask. "Because that's what I heard. I heard that I was so busy taking care of everyone that I forgot to notice when they didn't want to be taken care of. I heard that my husband felt suffocated by my attention, and my son felt neglected by my focus on recovery, and somehow I managed to fail everyone while thinking I was doing exactly what they needed." The kitchen feels too bright under the overhead fluorescent light I've never bothered to replace with something warmer. Everything looks harsh and unforgiving. including the expression on David's face as he struggles with how to respond to accusations he can't quite deny. "Mom, you're taking this all wrong," he says finally, but the words sound tired, like he's not even convincing himself. "Am I? Because from where I'm standing, it sounds like you've been having conversations about me, with Carmen, with your father before he died, probably with Elena tonight after I left the party early. Conversations about what's wrong with me, what I do too much of, what I don't understand about the people around me." I move to the kitchen table and sit down heavily, suddenly exhausted by the weight of this new knowledge. The table is the same one Roberto and I bought when David was in high school. Solid oak that survived decades of family meals and homework sessions and late-night conversations, but tonight it feels like a barrier between me and my son, rather than a gathering place. "You know what the strangest part is?" I continue, looking at my hands instead of at David's face. "I thought I was getting better, not just physically, but emotionally. I thought I was healing from the stroke, moving forward, building a new version of my life that could be happy even without your father in it." David takes a step closer, and I can see him wanting to comfort me, but something holds him back. Maybe he's learned that my version of comfort doesn't always match what other people actually need. But tonight, I realized that while I was congratulating myself on my recovery, everyone else was just waiting for me to become someone different, someone who needed less attention, who asked fewer questions, who could handle difficult news without falling apart. "That's not true," David says, but his protest sounds automatic. "Isn't it? When were you planning to tell me about Carmen? Next month? Next year? Or were you hoping I'd just figure it out gradually, piece by piece, so you wouldn't have to have one difficult conversation about it?" He doesn't answer immediately, which is answer enough. "And what about the things you said about your father? How long have you been carrying around the idea that I smothered him with care he didn't want? How many times have you looked at me taking care of people and thought I was doing it wrong? But you never said anything because you didn't want to hurt my feelings?" "It's complicated," David says finally, sinking into the chair across from me. "Dad did feel overwhelmed sometimes by how much you wanted to help. But he also knew you were coming from a place of love. He just wished you could have trusted him to ask for what he needed, instead of anticipating everything." The words sting because they ring true in ways I don't want to acknowledge. I think about Roberto's final months, how I scheduled his doctor appointments and organized his medications, and rearranged our bedroom to make everything more convenient for him. How I researched his condition obsessively and presented him with information about experimental treatments and dietary changes that might help. How I interpreted his quietness as acceptance rather than considering that it might be resignation. "Why didn't he tell me?" I ask, and my voice sounds smaller than I intend. "Because he loved you," David says simply. "And because he knew that taking care of people is how you show love. He didn't want to take that away from you, even when it felt like too much sometimes." We sit in silence for a while, the kitchen clock ticking away minutes that feel heavy with unspoken truths. I can hear my neighbor's dog barking in the distance and the hum of my refrigerator cycling on. Normal sounds of a normal evening in a life that suddenly feels anything but normal. "So what happens now?" I ask eventually. "Do you marry Carmen? Do you move in together? Do I pretend to be happy about it while secretly wondering if she's telling you all the ways I was difficult to work with during my recovery?" David reaches across the table and covers my hand with his, a gesture that should be comforting, but somehow makes me feel more alone. "Carmen would never do that," he says. "She cares about you. She talks about how hard you worked, how determined you were to get better. She has nothing but respect for the way you handled your recovery. But she fell in love with you while watching me struggle to tie my shoes," I point out. "She saw me at my absolute worst, and somehow that became the backdrop for your romance. Do you understand how that makes me feel?" David's grip on my hand tightens slightly, and when I look up at him, his eyes are bright with unshed tears. "I understand that nothing about this situation is fair to you," he says quietly. "I understand that we should have been more honest, more careful about how we handled things. I understand that you feel betrayed and confused and probably abandoned." He pauses, taking a shaky breath. "But I also need you to understand that I'm 50 years old, Mom. I'm divorced, my kids live with their mother most of the time, and I haven't been genuinely happy about anything in years. When I started talking to Carmen, when I realized we had something real between us, it felt like the first good thing that had happened since Dad died. So, I should be happy for you, I say, not quite a question. I don't know, he admits. I don't know what you should feel or what I have the right to ask for. I just know that I can't apologize for finding something good, even if the timing wasn't perfect. The kitchen clock chimes 10 times, marking another hour in this day that has rearranged everything I thought I understood about my life. David looks exhausted, and I suspect I look the same. We've both said things tonight that can't be unsaid, revealed truths that can't be hidden again. But as I look at my son across the table where we've shared so many conversations over the years, I realize that this might be the most honest we've ever been with each other. And that has to count for something, even if it doesn't make anything easier. 3 weeks pass before I hear from David again. 3 weeks of mornings when I wake up and automatically reach for my phone to call him before remembering that our last conversation ended with him walking out of my kitchen at nearly midnight, both of us too tired and raw to say goodbye properly. 3 weeks of dinners I cook for one person, sitting at the oak table where we used to share Sunday lunches when Roberto was alive, and David would bring the grandchildren over for my homemade empanadas and too much dessert. The house feels different now, quieter in a way that has nothing to do with the absence of voices and everything to do with the absence of purpose. For months after the stroke, every day had structure built around recovery. Exercises at 9, medication at noon, therapy appointments on Tuesdays and Thursdays, phone calls from David checking on my progress. Now I wake up to days that stretch ahead like blank pages, and I'm not sure what I'm supposed to write on them. I try to establish new routines. Morning walks through the neighborhood, though I avoid the street where David's house sits like a question I'm not ready to answer. Afternoon visits to the library, where I check out books I used to enjoy but find myself reading the same pages over and over without absorbing the words. Grocery shopping becomes an elaborate ritual of choosing ingredients for meals I don't particularly want to eat, as if the act of planning and purchasing could somehow restore meaning to days that feel increasingly hollow. The phone rings sometimes, Elena checking in with the careful concern of someone who witnessed the beginning of a family crisis and wants to help but doesn't know how. A few old friends who call to catch up, not knowing that my life has been quietly dismantled piece by piece until there's nothing particularly interesting left to catch up about. My doctor's office, confirming appointments that feel routine now instead of crucial, marking my successful return to baseline functioning without acknowledging that baseline no longer feels like enough. But no call from David, no text messages, no surprise visits with groceries he claims he happened to be in the neighborhood buying. The silence feels intentional, like he's giving us both space to process what happened at Elena's party and decide what comes next. But I'm not sure I know how to process any of this alone. The worst part isn't the loneliness exactly. I've been lonely before, during the months after Roberto died, during the early days of stroke recovery when simple conversations felt exhausting and impossible. The worst part is the growing suspicion that David might be right about some of the things he said, that maybe I do show love in ways that feel overwhelming to the people receiving it, that maybe Roberto did feel smothered by my attention during his final illness, even though he never complained or asked me to do less. I find myself remembering moments I'd forgotten or reinterpreted at the time, the way Roberto would sometimes watch me organizing his pill organizer with an expression I'd thought was gratitude, but might have been resignation. How he'd gently suggest that I didn't need to accompany him to every doctor's appointment, and how I'd insisted anyway because I wanted to be supportive. The times he'd start to reach for something, a glass of water, the television remote, and I'd already be handing it to him before he could ask, and how his thank you sometimes sounded automatic rather than heartfelt. Had I been taking care of him, or had I been managing him? Had I been showing love, or had I been showing anxiety disguised as love? The questions follow me through days that feel increasingly disconnected from any larger purpose. I catch myself preparing to call David to share small observations, the way the autumn light looks different this year, a funny story Elena told me, a recipe I thought he might want to try, before remembering that we're not talking, that our relationship has become complicated in ways I don't know how to navigate. On a Thursday afternoon, almost a month after Elena's party, I drive past Carmen's apartment complex without planning to. I tell myself I'm just taking a different route to the library, exploring neighborhoods I don't usually visit. But when I see her car in the parking lot, I find myself pulling over and sitting in my own car, staring at the building where the woman who helped me recover from my stroke is probably living her normal life, going about her daily routines, maybe talking to David on the phone, or planning their next dinner together. The building is nice but modest. 2-story brick with small balconies and a well-maintained parking lot. Middle-class respectable. The kind of place where healthcare workers and teachers and social workers live when they're careful with their money. I wonder which apartment is hers, whether she's home right now, whether she ever thinks about the month she spent helping me relearn basic tasks, and if those memories are now intertwined with whatever she's building with my son. A woman emerges from the building carrying a basket of laundry, and for a moment, I think it's Carmen before I realize it's someone else entirely, younger, with lighter hair, walking with the confident stride of someone who's never had to relearn how to coordinate their left and right sides after their brain forgot how to send the proper signals. I sit in my car watching this stranger load her laundry into a compact sedan, and I feel foolish for thinking that stalking my former nurse's apartment complex will somehow provide answers to questions I'm not even sure how to ask. But I don't drive away immediately. Instead, I sit there thinking about the woman Carmen was during those months when she came to my house 3 times a week, patient but firm when I got frustrated with exercises that seemed impossible, encouraging but realistic about the timeline for recovery, professional but warm enough that I actually looked forward to her visits instead of dreading them like I dreaded most medical appointments. She never made me feel broken, even when I couldn't remember the word for spoon, or when my handwriting looked like a child's unsteady scrawl. She celebrated small victories. The first day I could shower by myself, the morning I made coffee without spilling it, the afternoon I read an entire newspaper article without getting confused, without making them feel like consolation prizes for the person I used to be. How could I be angry at her for falling in love with David? How could I blame her for finding something beautiful during a time when she was spending her days watching someone slowly piece their life back together? If anything, shouldn't I be grateful that she cared enough about our family to let herself become invested in our happiness? But gratitude feels complicated when it's tangled up with loss and confusion, and the growing suspicion that I don't understand my own relationships as well as I thought I did. I'm still sitting in the parking lot when Carmen's car pulls in 2 spaces away from mine. She doesn't notice me at first, busy gathering shopping bags from her back seat. But when she straightens up and our eyes meet through my windshield, her face goes through a series of expressions: surprise, concern, something that might be guilt or might just be awkwardness. She approaches my car slowly, like someone trying not to startle a wild animal, and I roll down my window even though I'm not sure what I plan to say to her. "Mrs. Santos," she says, and her voice carries the same gentle professionalism it always did during our sessions together. Is everything okay? You look like you might be lost." It's a kind interpretation of what I'm doing here, and we both know it. I'm not lost in any geographical sense. I'm lost in the sense that I don't know how to exist in a world where the boundaries between patient and caregiver, between mother and son, between past and present, have all shifted in ways I never saw coming. I was just driving around, I say, which is partially true, thinking about things. Carmen nods, as if this makes perfect sense. As if she often encounters former patients sitting in her parking lot for no clear reason. Her shopping bags look heavy, filled with the kinds of practical items, groceries, cleaning supplies, what might be a prescription medication bag, that make up the routine maintenance of an adult life lived independently. The life I was working so hard to return to during our months together, never knowing that she was building her own version of that life alongside helping me rebuild mine. "Would you like to come up for coffee?" she asks. And the invitation surprises me. I mean, if you have time, if you want to talk. I should say no. I should drive home and continue maintaining the careful distance that seems safest for everyone involved. But Carmen is looking at me with the same expression she used to wear when she was explaining a particularly challenging exercise, patient, encouraging, like she believes I'm capable of doing difficult things even when I doubt it myself. Yes, I hear myself saying, I think I would like that. Her apartment is exactly what I would have expected if I'd ever thought to imagine it. Clean, comfortable, decorated with the thoughtful touches of someone who's made a real home rather than just a place to store belongings. Books on shelves that suggest wide-ranging interests, plants that are clearly thriving under careful attention, photographs that tell the story of a life filled with friends and family, and travel to places I recognize but have never visited myself. She makes coffee with the same careful precision she brought to measuring my blood pressure, and we sit at her small kitchen table where the afternoon light streams through windows that face west toward the mountains I can just barely see from my own house on clear days. "I know this is awkward," Carmen says after we've both taken a few sips of coffee that tastes better than anything I've been making for myself lately. "I know the situation with David and me isn't ideal, given our history." "Is that what we're calling it?" I ask. "A history?" She smiles, and it's the same warm expression I remember from our best days together, when my progress was particularly good or when I'd successfully completed an exercise that had been challenging me for weeks. "I prefer to think of it as a connection," she says. "Those months we worked together were meaningful for me, Mrs. Santos. Watching your determination, your refusal to accept that the stroke was going to define your limitations, it was inspiring. It reminded me why I chose healthcare in the first place. The words should feel good, but somehow they make me sadder instead, because they confirm what I've been suspecting, that the time she spent helping me recover was also the time she spent falling in love with my son. That my struggle became the backdrop for her happiness, and now I don't know how to separate those two things in my mind. But they didn't know what I had kept all along," I say quietly, more to myself than to Carmen. She tilts her head, clearly not understanding what I mean. And honestly, I'm not sure I understand it either. But something in me is shifting. Some piece of knowledge or strength or simply stubborn refusal to disappear that I thought I'd lost when Roberto died and again, when the stroke temporarily stole my words and my steady hands. Something that's mine alone, that doesn't depend on being needed or useful or perfectly attuned to what other people require from me. Something I'm only now beginning to remember I possess. The conversation with Carmen stays with me for days, but not in the way I expected. Instead of feeling more confused or hurt, I find myself thinking about the woman I was before Roberto got sick, before the stroke, before I became someone defined primarily by taking care of other people. I was 32 when David was born, already established in my career as a Spanish teacher at the local high school. I had opinions about literature and politics and the proper way to conjugate irregular verbs. I traveled to Mexico every summer to improve my language skills and came back with stories that made my students laugh and dream about places beyond our small town. I sit in my living room, looking through photo albums I haven't opened since Roberto's funeral, and there she is, that younger version of myself, standing in front of the pyramids of Teotihuacan, arms spread wide like I'm embracing the entire sky, teaching cooking classes at the community center, flower in my hair and joy on my face as I demonstrate how to make proper mole, dancing at my wedding, my head thrown back in laughter at something Roberto whispered in my ear. When did I stop being that woman? When did I become someone whose primary identity was caregiver, whose main source of satisfaction came from anticipating other people's needs before they could voice them? It wasn't sudden, I realize. It was gradual, like the way hair turns gray or skin develops lines. So slowly you don't notice until one day you look in the mirror and wonder when the change happened. Roberto's mother got sick when David was 10, and I stepped in to help coordinate her care. My own mother started showing signs of dementia when David was in college, and I became the one who managed her doctors and medications. Roberto's health started declining in his 60s, and naturally I became his primary advocate and caregiver. Each time, it felt like love. Each time, it felt like the right thing to do. But somewhere in the process, I forgot that taking care of people could be something I chose to do rather than something I had to do, something that expressed my values rather than something that defined my entire identity. The realization doesn't come with anger or regret, exactly. It comes with something quieter, more like recognition, like finding a piece of jewelry you'd forgotten you owned, hidden in the back of a drawer, still beautiful and valuable even though you haven't worn it in years. I call Elena on a Tuesday morning, not for comfort or sympathy, but because I remember that she was the one who encouraged me to apply for that teaching position 40 years ago, back when I wasn't sure I was qualified or brave enough to stand in front of teenagers and try to make them care about Spanish grammar. "I'm thinking about going back to Mexico," I tell her without preamble when she answers the phone. There's a pause, and I can almost hear Elena calculating whether this is a healthy impulse or a concerning one. For vacation? She asks carefully. Maybe, or maybe for longer than that. I've been thinking about the language immersion program I used to do in Guadalajara. They have housing for teachers, and the cost of living is so much lower than here. I could rent out my house and actually live on my teacher's pension if I wanted to. Elena is quiet for a moment, and I can picture her sitting in her kitchen, probably wondering if my stroke recovery included some kind of delayed emotional breakdown that's just now surfacing. Maria, she says gently, are you running away from David and this situation with Carmen? The question deserves an honest answer, so I think about it seriously before responding. No, I say finally, and I'm surprised by how certain I sound. I'm not running away from anything. I think maybe I'm running towards something I forgot I wanted. That afternoon, I drive to the high school where I taught for 28 years. It's been 5 years since I retired, but the building looks exactly the same. Red brick facade, tall windows that never quite let in enough light. The same overgrown landscaping that the school board always promises to update, but never does. I park in the visitor spot and sit for a moment, remembering the thousands of mornings I walked through those front doors with lesson plans and hope, and the particular exhaustion that comes from spending your days with teenagers who are convinced they already know everything important about the world. The security guard recognizes me immediately. Mrs. Santos, how are you feeling? We heard about your stroke. You look wonderful. You really do. His enthusiasm is genuine, and it reminds me that there was a time when my identity extended beyond my family, when I had professional relationships and colleagues who valued my opinions about things other than medication schedules and physical therapy exercises. The Spanish department is on the second floor, down a hallway that still smells like industrial disinfectant and teenage anxiety. I find my replacement, a young woman named Jennifer who's probably half my age and definitely more technologically savvy than I ever was. But when I knock on the classroom door that used to be mine, she greets me with the kind of respect I'd forgotten I'd earned during my decades of teaching. Mrs. Santos, the students still talk about you, especially the ones who did your Mexican cultural immersion unit. Half my advanced students want to know if you're ever coming back to do guest lectures. Why, we talk for almost an hour, and I'm struck by how natural it feels to discuss curriculum and language acquisition theories, and the particular challenges of teaching subjunctive mood to students who barely understand conditional tenses in English. This is a part of my brain that's been dormant for years, and waking it up feels like stretching muscles I'd forgotten I had. The district is always looking for substitute teachers, Jennifer mentions as our conversation winds down, especially people with your experience and native-level fluency. You could probably work as much or as little as you wanted. Driving home, I feel something I haven't experienced in months. Excitement about the possibility of tomorrow being different from today. Not different because something bad might be resolved, or something broken might be fixed, but different because I might choose to make it different. That evening, I call the language immersion program in Guadalajara, the same one I attended as a young teacher eager to improve my skills. The woman who answers speaks English with a slight accent and seems genuinely pleased to hear from a potential participant. We have several programs for educators, she explains. Intensive language and culture immersion, teaching methodology workshops, homestays with local families. Many of our participants are retired teachers who want to reconnect with their passion for language education. Retired teachers who want to reconnect with their passion. The phrase resonates with something deep in my chest. A recognition that I've been grieving not just the loss of my husband or the temporary loss of my faculties after the stroke, but the loss of parts of myself that I voluntarily gave up in service of being what other people needed me to be. The next session starts in January, the woman continues. 6 weeks to 3 months, depending on your goals. Housing is provided, and meals are included. It's quite affordable, especially compared to most language immersion programs. January is 3 months away. Enough time to arrange everything, to rent out my house, to have whatever difficult conversations need to happen with David. Enough time to decide whether this is really what I want or just a fantasy I'm entertaining because my current life feels too small. But it doesn't feel like a fantasy. It feels like remembering who I was before I became someone defined entirely by her relationships to other people. I hang up the phone and sit in my kitchen, looking around at the space that's been the center of my domestic life for over a decade. It's a good kitchen, functional and comfortable. Scene of countless family dinners and holiday preparations and quiet breakfasts shared with Roberto before he left for work. But tonight it feels less like a sanctuary and more like a comfortable prison I've been living in without realizing I had the key to unlock it anytime I wanted. The next morning, I call David, not to argue or rehash our conversation from Elena's party, but because I have something to tell him that feels important and new. He answers on the third ring, and his voice sounds cautious, like he's not sure whether this call will end with one of us hanging up angry. "Hi, Mom. How are you doing?" "Better," I say, and I'm surprised by how true that feels. I'm doing better than I have in a while, actually. I wanted to tell you about something I'm considering, and I want you to know that it's not about you and Carmen. It's about me figuring out what I want my life to look like going forward. There's a pause, and I can hear something that might be relief in his breathing. "Okay," he says. "I'm listening." I tell him about the teaching opportunity, about Mexico, about the growing sense that I need to remember who I am when I'm not taking care of someone else. I explain that I'm not running away from our family or our complicated situation, but running toward a version of myself I'd forgotten existed. David listens without interrupting, and when I finish, he's quiet for a long moment. "You know what, Mom?" he says finally, and his voice sounds different than it has in weeks. Lighter, maybe. Less weighted with guilt and obligation and the exhaustion of trying to manage everyone's feelings. "That sounds like exactly what you should do." "Really? Really? I think you've spent so many years being what everyone else needed that maybe it's time to figure out what you need. And maybe," he pauses, choosing his words carefully, "maybe some distance will give us all time to figure out how to be a family that's different from the one we used to be, but still a family." It wasn't pain anymore. It was clarity. The kind of clarity that comes not from having all the answers, but from finally asking the right questions. Not, "How do I get back to the person I used to be?" but, "Who do I want to become?" Not, "How do I fix the relationships that feel broken?" but, "How do I build relationships based on who we all are now, rather than who we used to be?" That night, I start researching flights to Mexico and composing emails to rental management companies about leasing my house for 3 months. I pull out my old Spanish textbooks and practice conjugating verbs I haven't thought about in years. I make lists of things I'll need to arrange, people I'll need to notify, decisions I'll need to make. For the first time since the stroke, maybe for the first time since Roberto got sick, I'm planning a future based on what I want, rather than what seems necessary or responsible or expected. It feels terrifying and liberating in equal measure. The first sign that something is shifting comes on a Saturday morning in November, when David appears at my front door with Carmen beside him and a grocery bag in his hands. I haven't seen either of them since that awkward coffee conversation at Carmen's apartment 6 weeks ago, and their presence on my doorstep feels both surprising and somehow inevitable, like the resolution to a song that's been building toward this moment without my conscious awareness. "We brought ingredients for breakfast," David says, holding up the bag with an uncertain smile. "If you're not busy, if you don't mind the company." I should feel ambushed by this unexpected visit. But instead, I find myself curious about what they want to say or do that requires the buffer of shared meal preparation. There's something different about both of them. David looks more relaxed than he has in months, and Carmen seems less careful, less like she's walking on eggshells around my feelings. "I just made coffee," I say, stepping aside to let them in. "And I was actually hoping to talk to both of you anyway." They exchange a quick glance, and I catch something that might be concern or might just be the normal nervousness of people who aren't sure what they're walking into. But they follow me to the kitchen, where Carmen immediately begins unpacking ingredients with the efficient movements of someone who's comfortable in domestic spaces. Eggs, cheese, chorizo, peppers, the makings of a proper Mexican-style breakfast. "You seem different," David observes, settling into his usual chair at the kitchen table while Carmen and I navigate around each other near the stove. "More, I don't know, more like yourself, if that makes sense." It does make sense, actually. The past few weeks of planning my trip to Guadalajara, of remembering what it feels like to anticipate something exciting rather than simply managing daily maintenance, have reminded me of parts of my personality I'd almost forgotten. I feel more solid somehow, more present in my own life, rather than floating around the edges of other people's needs and expectations. "I've been making some plans," I tell them, whisking eggs while Carmen chops vegetables with professional precision. And I wanted to share them with you before I finalize everything. I explain about the language immersion program, about renting out the house, about the growing certainty that I need to spend time rediscovering who Maria Santos is when she's not defined primarily by her relationships to other people. I talk about the teaching opportunities, about living with a host family in Guadalajara, about the possibility that 3 months might extend to 6 if I find what I'm hoping to find there. David listens without interrupting, occasionally nodding in a way that suggests he's not surprised by anything I'm telling him. Carmen focuses on cooking, but I can tell she's paying close attention to every word, and something in her posture suggests she approves of what she's hearing. "When would you leave?" David asks when I finish. "January 15th. The program starts on the 22nd, so I'd have a few days to get settled, deal with jet lag, remember what it feels like to be somewhere where Spanish is the primary language instead of just something I used to teach teenagers who mostly didn't want to learn it." Carmen laughs, a genuine sound that reminds me why David fell for her in the first place. "I bet you were one of those teachers who made even reluctant students care about learning. You have that quality. You make people want to do better than they thought they could." The observation touches something tender in me, a recognition of professional competence and personal warmth that I'd almost forgotten I possessed. During the months of stroke recovery, I'd become so focused on regaining basic functions that I'd lost sight of the more complex qualities that made me effective as a teacher, and, before that crisis overwhelmed everything, as a person. "Actually," Carmen continues, placing perfectly scrambled eggs onto 3 plates, "that's part of why we wanted to talk to you today. David and I have been discussing something, and we wanted to get your thoughts before we make any decisions." I accept my plate and wait, uncertain whether I'm about to receive news I want to hear or something that will complicate my newly clarified sense of direction. "We're thinking about getting married," David says simply. No preamble or careful build-up. "Not right away. Probably next fall, after you've had time to do your Mexico adventure and we've all had time to figure out how to be a family that includes Carmen." I set down my fork and look at them both, surprised by my own reaction. Instead of the complicated mixture of emotions I might have expected, hurt at being excluded from their planning, concern about the speed of their relationship, anxiety about how this changes my role in David's life, I feel something much simpler. Relief, maybe. Or just the quiet satisfaction of watching people I care about make decisions that seem right for them. "How do you feel about that?" I ask, genuinely curious rather than testing them with a loaded question. "Nervous," Carmen admits, twirling eggs around on her fork. "Not about marrying David, that part feels completely right, but nervous about becoming part of a family that's still figuring out how to heal from some difficult conversations and complicated feelings. And hopeful," David adds, reaching for Carmen's hand across the table. "Hopeful that maybe we can build something new, instead of trying to go back to something that wasn't working as well as we pretended it was." The honesty is startling and refreshing. For so many years, our family conversations have been careful constructions designed to avoid difficult topics and protect everyone's feelings. But something about the events of the past few months seems to have burned away our willingness to maintain comfortable illusions, leaving us with the harder but more authentic work of actually talking about what's real. "I think," I say slowly, choosing my words with the same care I used to use when explaining complex grammar concepts to students who were struggling to understand, "that you should do what feels right for your relationship, regardless of how I feel about it. And I think my feelings about it are less important than my feelings about myself and what I want my life to look like going forward." Carmen nods as if this makes perfect sense to her, but David looks slightly puzzled. "What I mean," I continue, "is that for too many years, I've made my happiness dependent on managing everyone else's happiness. I've defined my worth by how well I could anticipate needs and solve problems and keep everyone comfortable and cared for. But that's not sustainable, and it's not fair to any of us." I pause to take a bite of breakfast, which is excellent. Carmen clearly knows her way around Mexican cooking techniques, another small bridge between her world and mine. "I think you should get married because you love each other and want to build a life together. I think you should plan a wedding that reflects who you are as a couple, not what you think I need to see or hear in order to feel included. And I think I should focus on building a life that makes me happy independently, so that when I'm part of your lives, it's because I choose to be, not because I need to be needed." The kitchen falls quiet, except for the sounds of eating and the distant hum of Saturday morning neighborhood life. Lawn mowers starting up, children playing in backyards, the normal progression of weekend routines that continue regardless of whatever personal revelations are happening around kitchen tables. There's something else, David says eventually, and his tone suggests this is the real reason for their visit. Something I need to tell you that I probably should have mentioned weeks ago. I feel my stomach tighten slightly, wondering what additional complexity is about to be introduced to a situation that's finally starting to feel manageable. Carmen's pregnant, he says simply, and the words hang in the air between us like a bridge I'm not sure I'm ready to cross. Pregnant. At 38 and 50, respectively, they're having a baby. My son is starting a new family with the woman who helped me recover from my stroke, and they're telling me about it over breakfast in my kitchen on a Saturday morning in November, 2 months before I'm scheduled to leave for Mexico. I should feel something dramatic: joy, concern, confusion about the timing, anxiety about how this changes everything we've just been discussing about independence and new beginnings. Instead, I feel something much quieter and more complex. A recognition that life continues to unfold in ways that can't be planned or managed or controlled, that families expand and contract and reshape themselves according to forces much larger than any individual's preferences or comfort level. How do you feel about it? I ask. The same question I posed about their marriage plans, because I genuinely want to know rather than assume I understand their experience. Terrified and thrilled in equal measure, Carmen answers with the kind of honest simplicity I'm learning to appreciate about her. We weren't trying, but we weren't preventing it either. And when we found out, it just felt like the next right thing, even though the timing is complicated. Very complicated, David agrees, looking at me with an expression I can't quite read. Because this means you're going to be a grandmother again, Mom. And I know the timing with your Mexico plans isn't ideal. And I don't want you to feel like you have to change your life around what we're doing, but... He trails off, clearly struggling with how to navigate between respecting my newfound independence and acknowledging that this development affects our whole family dynamic. When is the baby due? I ask. Late June, Carmen says. So you'd be back from Mexico well before then, if you decide to stick with your original timeline. And if you decide you want to extend your stay, David adds quickly, we'll understand. We'll figure out how to manage everything without expecting you to step in and take care of everyone like you always have. The conversation is moving into territory I'm not prepared to map yet. Decisions that will need to be made over time rather than resolved in a single breakfast discussion. But something about their approach, the way they're presenting information without demanding immediate reactions, the way they're acknowledging my autonomy while still including me in their planning, suggests that maybe we're all learning how to be in relationship with each other differently. I'm happy for you, I say, and I'm surprised to realize it's true. Not complicated happiness, not happiness mixed with reservations or concerns, or the need to manage everyone's expectations. Just clean, simple pleasure in watching two people I care about embrace something that excites them, even if it makes everything else more complex. Really? Carmen asks, and I can hear the relief in her voice. Really? And I'm going to Mexico in January regardless of anything else that's happening in anyone else's life. But that doesn't mean I won't be here for whatever you need when I get back. David smiles, and it's the first completely relaxed expression I've seen on his face since Elena's party changed everything. You know what? He says. I think that might be exactly what we all need to hear. The day before I'm scheduled to leave for Mexico, something happens that I never could have anticipated. David calls me at 7 in the morning, his voice tight with an emotion I can't immediately identify. Not panic exactly, but something close to it. Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me, even if you think it might hurt my feelings. I'm sitting at my kitchen table with coffee and a checklist of last-minute travel preparations. My suitcase packed and waiting by the front door like a faithful dog ready for an adventure. The house feels different already, lighter somehow, as if it's preparing to let me go without clinging to my ankles like it might have done a few months ago. Of course, I say, though his tone makes me brace for something difficult. Do you think I'm making the same mistakes Dad made? The question stops me completely, not just because it's unexpected, but because it suggests David has been carrying around thoughts and fears that never occurred to me. What do you mean? I ask, though part of me already knows what he's getting at, with Carmen, with the baby, the way I handle relationships. Do you think I'm going to end up making her feel the same way Dad apparently made you feel? Overwhelmed by care she didn't ask for, managed instead of loved, suffocated by good intentions? There's pain in his voice that reaches across the phone line and settles somewhere in my chest. My son, my 50-year-old son, is asking me to help him understand how to love someone without repeating patterns he's apparently been observing and worrying about for longer than I realized. David, I say carefully, where is this coming from? I've been thinking about what you said that night after Elena's party, about how Dad felt overwhelmed by your attention sometimes, how he wished you could have trusted him to ask for what he needed instead of anticipating everything, and I realized I do some of the same things. He pauses, and I can hear him taking a shaky breath. Carmen mentioned yesterday that I've been hovering since we found out about the pregnancy, making doctor's appointments for her, researching pregnancy nutrition, reorganizing her kitchen so everything would be easier to reach. And she said it with a laugh, like it was sweet. But something about the way she said it reminded me of how Dad used to thank you for things he didn't actually want you to do. The recognition hits me like a small earthquake, shifting everything I thought I understood about our family patterns. David wasn't just criticizing my caregiving style that night. He was recognizing it in himself and worrying about where it might lead. Have you talked to Carmen about this? I ask. Not directly. Not about the deeper stuff. I'm scared to, honestly. What if she tells me I'm already doing things wrong? What if she's already feeling overwhelmed but doesn't want to hurt my feelings by saying so? I lean back in my chair, looking around my kitchen one more time before I leave it for 3 months, and I think about all the conversations Roberto and I never had about this exact dynamic. All the times he might have wanted to ask me to back off but didn't know how to do it without seeming ungrateful. All the ways we loved each other imperfectly because we were both too afraid of difficult conversations to risk the temporary discomfort that might have led to deeper understanding. David, I say, do you want some advice from someone who's made a lot of these mistakes? Yes, please. Ask her directly what kind of support she wants during the pregnancy. Not what you think she should want, not what you've read that pregnant women need, but what she specifically wants from you specifically. And when she tells you, believe her, even if it's less than you want to give or different from what you plan to offer. I pause, thinking about how to explain something I'm still learning myself. Love isn't about anticipating someone's needs perfectly. It's about creating space where they feel safe expressing their actual needs, even when those needs are different from what you expected or hoped for. But what if she doesn't know what she needs? What if she's never been pregnant before and doesn't have experience asking for support? The question tells me everything I need to know about where David learned his approach to relationships. From me, obviously. From watching me assume that caring for people meant figuring out what they needed before they asked for it. Taking responsibility for their comfort, even when they didn't request my intervention. Then you figure it out together, I say gently. You ask questions, you pay attention to her responses, you check in regularly about whether what you're doing is helpful or overwhelming. And you accept that you're going to get it wrong sometimes, and that getting it wrong doesn't mean you're failing as a partner. It means you're learning. David is quiet for a long moment, and I can almost hear him processing this information, comparing it to whatever internal playbook he's been following about how to love people properly. Mom, he says finally, I owe you an apology. For what? For that night at Elena's party, when I said those things about how you took care of Dad. I wasn't just criticizing you. I was afraid of becoming you. And that was unfair because there was nothing actually wrong with how much you wanted to take care of people. The only thing wrong was that Dad never told you when it felt like too much, and you never asked. The apology lands somewhere tender in me, not because I'd been waiting for it, but because it suggests David has been doing his own work to understand our family patterns instead of just reacting to them. And I was afraid, he continues, that if I turned out like you, someone who shows love by trying to manage other people's lives, Carmen would eventually feel trapped the way Dad might have felt trapped, and she'd resent me for caring too much instead of thanking me for it. But you're not me, David, and Carmen isn't Dad. And this is a different relationship with different people who can choose to communicate differently than we did. I know that now, or I'm starting to know it. Carmen actually told me yesterday that my hovering wasn't annoying her, but she could see it was making me anxious, and she wanted to talk about what was driving it. I smile, thinking about Carmen's professional training and recognizing when someone's caretaking behaviors are more about managing their own anxiety than responding to actual needs. She sounds like she's pretty good at direct communication. She is. Better than anyone in our family has ever been, honestly. She asked me yesterday if I was trying to control the pregnancy because I was scared something would go wrong, or if I was trying to prove I'd be a good father, or if I was just used to managing situations when I felt overwhelmed by them. What did you tell her? All three, probably. And she said that was useful information, because now she knew my behavior wasn't about her doing something wrong or not being capable enough. It was about me working through my own fears about becoming a parent and being in a serious relationship again. The conversation we're having feels like a completion of something that started at Elena's party, but couldn't be finished until both of us had done enough thinking to understand what we were really talking about. David, I say, I'm proud of you for asking these questions instead of just hoping you'll figure it out as you go along. I'm proud of you for going to Mexico, he says, for choosing something you want instead of just choosing what seems responsible or necessary. It's terrifying, I admit. I haven't traveled alone in decades. I haven't been the only person responsible for my own happiness in longer than I can remember. But you're doing it anyway. I'm doing it anyway. We sit with that for a moment. Two people who've spent most of their lives defining themselves through relationships with other people, both of us choosing something scarier and more authentic than our comfortable patterns. Mom, there's something else I want to tell you, David says, and his tone shifts to something more formal, like he's been rehearsing what comes next. Okay. When Dad was dying, he asked me to tell you something, but I never did, because I thought it would hurt you more than help you, and because I wasn't sure I understood what he meant. But I think I understand it now. My chest tightens, partly with anticipation, and partly with the familiar grief that still surfaces when David talks about Roberto's final weeks. He said to tell you that you were the best wife anyone could have asked for, but that he worried you'd never figure out how to be happy when no one needed taking care of. He said he hoped you'd learn to take care of yourself with the same energy you took care of everyone else. The words settle into me slowly, like water soaking into dry earth. Not painful exactly, but profound in their implications. Roberto had seen something about me that I'm only now beginning to see about myself, and his final message wasn't criticism, it was permission. He knew I'd need to learn how to live differently after he was gone. I say, more statement than question. I think so. And I think he would be really happy about this Mexico trip, about you choosing something that's just for you, that doesn't involve taking care of anyone else or managing anyone else's life. I look around my kitchen one more time, at the space where Roberto and I shared so many mornings like this one, where David grew up eating breakfast before school, where Carmen and I had that awkward coffee conversation that started my thinking about who I wanted to be beyond my caregiving role. Tomorrow morning, I'll be on a plane to Guadalajara, traveling toward a version of myself I've forgotten I could be. And for the first time since this whole journey began at Elena's party, I'm not worried about what I'm leaving behind, or whether the people I love will be okay without me constantly available to anticipate their needs. They'll be fine. Better than fine, probably. And so will I. David, I say, thank you for telling me what your father said. And thank you for asking me the questions you asked today. Thank you for answering them honestly. Now you need to go have these same conversations with Carmen. I will. Today, actually. We're meeting for lunch, and I'm going to tell her everything I just told you and ask her to help me figure out how to be a good partner, instead of just an anxious caretaker. She'll appreciate that. I hope so. And Mom, have an amazing time in Mexico. Don't worry about us. Don't call every day to check in. Just go be yourself and remember who that person is when she's not trying to take care of everyone else. After we hang up, I sit in my kitchen feeling something I haven't experienced in years. Complete confidence that I'm making the right choice for the right reasons. Not a choice designed to please someone else or avoid disappointing anyone or maintain some version of myself that other people need me to be. Just a choice that honors who I am and who I want to become. The revelation isn't dramatic or earth-shattering. It's quiet, steady, like finally understanding the solution to a puzzle I've been working on for months without realizing it. Tomorrow, I begin again. 3 months later, I'm sitting in a cafe in the heart of Guadalajara, writing in a journal I started keeping during my second week here. The pages are filled with observations about Mexican expressions I'd forgotten existed, sketches of the colonial architecture that surrounds my host family's house, and reflections on the woman I'm rediscovering myself to be when no one expects me to be anything other than exactly who I am in each moment. My Spanish has returned with a fluency that surprises everyone, including myself. Not just the academic Spanish I used to teach, but the intuitive, emotional Spanish that flows when you're living entirely in a language instead of just visiting it for class periods. My host mother, Esperanza, is 68 years old and has been taking in language students for over a decade. She treats me not like a tourist or a student, but like a temporary family member who happens to be learning something important about herself during her stay. "You are different than when you arrived," she told me yesterday as we prepared dinner together in her kitchen that smells of cilantro and lime, and the kind of comfort that transcends language barriers. More, ¿cómo se dice? More present in your own life. She's right. The woman who arrived in Guadalajara 3 months ago was still carrying the weight of other people's expectations, still defining herself primarily through her relationships to David and Roberto, and even Carmen. This woman, the one who navigates bustling markets without anxiety, who joins evening conversations with neighbors without worrying about whether she's saying the right things, who teaches English to local children simply because she enjoys it, this woman feels both familiar and completely new. I've been teaching at a small community center twice a week, working with adults who are learning English for practical reasons, better jobs, communication with relatives who've immigrated to the United States, personal enrichment that has nothing to do with anyone else's needs or expectations. My students range in age from 22 to 76, and they remind me daily that learning never stops, that growth doesn't have an expiration date, that it's never too late to become a different version of yourself. Yesterday, I received a letter from David, not an email or a text message, but an actual handwritten letter on real paper, delivered through the Mexican postal system like something from another era. He wrote that he and Carmen have been practicing the kind of direct communication we discussed before I left, and that it's harder than either of them expected, but also more rewarding. "She's teaching me to ask instead of assuming," he wrote in his careful handwriting that reminds me so much of Roberto's. "And I'm teaching her that she can trust me with the truth about what she needs, even when it's not what I expected to hear." We're both learning that love is more complicated and more simple than we thought. Carmen is doing well with the pregnancy, according to David's letter. They're planning a small wedding for next month, and he wanted me to know that they've decided to wait until I return to have the kind of celebration that includes family, not because they need my permission or approval, but because they want me to be part of the joy instead of feeling like they're moving forward without me. "We realized," the letter continued, "that including you in our happiness is different from making our happiness dependent on your participation. The first one honors our relationship. The second one would make it a burden for everyone. The distinction would have been lost on me 6 months ago, but now it feels like the most natural thing in the world. Love that includes without demanding. Relationships that invite participation without requiring it. Family connections that enhance individual lives rather than defining them completely." I wrote back immediately, telling them how proud I am of the work they're doing, how much I'm looking forward to celebrating with them when I return, and how completely confident I am that they're building something beautiful together. But I also told them about the decision I've been contemplating for the past month. I'm extending my stay in Mexico until August. Not because I'm avoiding anything back home, but because I've discovered something here that I want to explore more deeply. The community center has offered me a more substantial teaching position, and I've found an apartment I can rent month to month that overlooks a small plaza where children play soccer every evening, while their grandmothers sell elotes and fresh fruit from colorful stands. It's a simple life, but it's entirely my own. I wake up when my body feels rested, eat meals that appeal to me, spend my days teaching and learning, and walking through a city that reveals new secrets every time I turn down a different street. I've made friends who know nothing about my history as a caregiver or my identity as David's mother or my previous life as Roberto's wife. To them, I'm simply Maria, a woman with opinions about literature and politics and the proper way to prepare mole. Someone who laughs easily and speaks Spanish with the accent of someone who learned it formally but loves it intuitively. The woman I was before I became defined primarily by taking care of other people. Elena calls me every Sunday, and our conversations have become some of the highlights of my week. Not because she needs me to manage any crisis or provide emotional support for some family drama, but because we've rediscovered the friendship that existed before our lives became complicated by marriage and children, and the assumption that sisters should primarily discuss problems that need solving. "You sound like yourself again," she told me last Sunday, her voice crackling slightly through the international connection. Like the Maria I remember from when we were young and thought we could do anything. Maybe I can do anything, I said, surprising myself with how natural that possibility feels now. Maybe you can, she agreed. Maybe we all can, when we stop letting other people's needs determine our choices. I think about Roberto often, but differently than I used to. Instead of missing him with the desperate ache of someone whose identity was built around being his caretaker, I miss him with the cleaner sadness of someone who shared real love with another person and understands that love doesn't end just because circumstances change. I think he would approve of this Mexico adventure, this late-life exploration of who Maria Santos can be when she's not trying to be what someone else needs. I think about David and Carmen too, but without the anxiety that used to accompany thoughts of their relationship. They're building something together that doesn't require my management or approval, and that feels like exactly what healthy adult relationships should be. I'm excited to meet my new grandchild when I return, excited to be part of their growing family, but excited as someone who has her own life and interests and sources of meaning rather than someone whose primary purpose is being needed by other people. The cafe where I'm writing is a place I've come to love, small and locally owned, frequented by a mixture of neighborhood residents and the occasional tourist who's wandered off the more beaten paths. The owner, Miguel, has become a friend who reserves my favorite table by the window and always has opinions about whatever book I'm reading. Today he brought me café de olla without being asked, the way Roberto used to bring me coffee in bed on Sunday mornings, and I realized that this kind of small kindness can exist without obligation or expectation on either side. ¿Todo bien? Miguel asks, noticing that I've been writing for over an hour. Todo muy bien, I reply, and I mean it completely. Next week, I'm planning a trip to Oaxaca to visit the textile museums and perhaps take a weaving class that has nothing to do with any practical skill anyone else needs me to develop. The following month, I'm considering a cooking intensive that focuses on regional Mexican cuisines I've never explored. In July, there's a literature festival that brings together Spanish-language writers from across Latin America, plans that are entirely my own. Experiences I'm choosing because they interest me rather than because they serve someone else's needs or expectations. The sun is setting over Guadalajara, painting the colonial buildings in shades of gold and orange that would be impossible to recreate in a photograph. Around me, the evening routine of Mexican city life is beginning. Families gathering for dinner, friends meeting for drinks, couples walking hand in hand through plazas that have witnessed these same rhythms for centuries. I close my journal and prepare to walk back to Esperanza's house, where she'll probably have dinner waiting and stories about her grandchildren's latest adventures at school. Not because she needs to take care of me, but because sharing meals and conversation is how she shows hospitality to the rotating collection of students and visitors who pass through her home. Tonight, I'll help her prepare tomorrow's breakfast, not because it's expected or required, but because I enjoy the companionship and the opportunity to learn new techniques for preparing foods I've been eating my whole life without understanding their complexity. Tomorrow, I'll teach my English students new vocabulary words and learn new Spanish expressions from them in return. We'll laugh about the cultural differences that make language learning both challenging and delightful, and I'll drive home the point that making mistakes is part of learning rather than evidence of failure. And sometime next week, I'll write another letter to David and Carmen, telling them about my decision to stay longer, about the life I'm building here that belongs entirely to me, about the growing confidence that I can be happy independently while still choosing to be part of their happiness when I return. Because that's what I've learned here in Mexico, in this beautiful city that welcomed a confused woman looking for herself and is sending back someone who knows exactly who she is and what she wants. Love doesn't require sacrifice of self. Family doesn't require the abandonment of individual dreams. Caring for people doesn't mean accepting responsibility for their happiness at the expense of your own. Sometimes, silence is the loudest truth. But sometimes, the loudest truth is the sound of a woman finally, completely choosing herself, not instead of loving others, but as the foundation that makes loving others sustainable and genuine and free. I walk home through streets that smell of jasmines and street food, past fountains that have been singing the same songs for centuries, beneath stars that look exactly the same as they do from my kitchen window back home, but somehow seem brighter here, where I remember that I am more than the sum of other people's needs. I am Maria Santos, teacher and learner, traveler and resident, daughter and mother and grandmother, And most importantly, a woman who has finally figured out how to be enough for herself.